Hi everyone, how are you doing? I am Steve, your host, and we are here to follow the launch of the OneWeb number 9 launch. It will happen at 22 and 23 UTC. That's then no, not 23, no, 10:33 p.m. UTC. This is a launch performed by a Soyouz 2.1B with a frigate upper stage. It will happen in 52 minutes. You have the counter on the bottom left of your screen. And in the meantime, we will go through the details of the launcher, the Soyouz launcher with the frigate upper stage, and how the different satellites are made and how they are released. Of course, if you have any question, don't hesitate to ask your questions in the chat, because I can answer them. I will answer any question you might have. There's no dumb question here. I'm here to try to answer everything. Of course, I don't know the answer to any question you might have, but I will try my best. So, the lift-off time. This is today at 22 hours and 33 minutes UTC, launched from Baikonur, the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. This is the historic launch site for the Soyouz, of course. And the Soyouz is a very powerful, a very historic rocket with nearly 2,000 launches along the years from the 60s with Gagarin and every other manned, crewed, mostly manned. Every crewed mission was launched on a Soyouz, but also, of course, also like today, cargo missions with satellite deployments. Of course, this is not the same rocket as in the 60s. The Soyouz has evolved a lot from there, but it still has the iconic silhouette with the 4 strap-on booster on the side and the center core with the upper stage on top. And this is really interesting. This is a really nice sight to see when it lifts off. So the customer is OneWeb. OneWeb is a company that was founded in 2012 under the name Worldview. But until 2015, they tried to gather money, gather funds to deploy their constellation. In mid 2016, they raised 1 billion from a bank and 200 million from other investors, which led to, in early 2017, they started working on the hardware part. And the satellite constellation is quite comparable to the Starlink constellation, of course, and with a lot of satellites in low Earth orbit. Low Earth orbit is anywhere between 100 kilometers and 2,000 kilometers. Of course, 100 kilometers is not a stable orbit because of the atmosphere. It's very thin, but it slows the satellites down very quickly. So there are generally at least 200 or 250 kilometers for temporary orbits, and mostly 400 or 500 kilometers for a real stable orbit, like for the International Space Station or the Starlink satellites. But the OneWeb satellites, they go a little bit higher at 1,200 kilometers, 12 100 kilometers in English. That's still very low, which ensures low latencies when transmitting data, but high enough to be stable and not have many atmospheric drag that would slow down and make the satellite hinder the satellite's life in orbit. The end constellation is supposed to be around 600 satellites, 600 active satellites, and 48, I believe, 48 satellites that will be spare satellites and will help maintain the constellation at its nominal level. And the first launches were in 2019, February 27th, 2019, with 6 satellites that were launched. What is interesting is that the company is based in Britain's Channel Islands, which is mostly for financial purposes. They don't pay many taxes. This is a joint venture with Airbus to produce the satellites. Airbus is the European company Airbus Defence and Space, is producing the satellites in a facility in Florida. So this is pretty much international. With European companies and US also. But in 2020, OneWeb and its 18 affiliates filed for bankruptcy in the US. This was because they said it was because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and they laid off approximately 85% of their 500 employees, but only retained the capability to control the operational satellites already in orbit. But really soon, in July, the British government bought shares of the company and salvaged the company. So they are not under bankruptcy protection anymore. And they are actively launching many more satellites. There were the OneWeb 8 launch that was, I think, a month ago. And this is the 9th launch. We have 34 satellites on this launch, as usual. It's not like the 60 satellites of the Starlink missions, but it's pretty impressive also, because the satellites are pretty much cubic, which is they are 1 meter by 1 meter, and I think 1 meter on 30 centimeters. 1 meter is the length between your hand and your opposite shoulder. If you don't know, that's also 3 feet. So they're cubic, and all the satellites are stacked inside the fairing around the sun, a central column. There are 8 satellites per row, and 2 on the top row. So we have, I believe, 4 row, which is 32 satellites, and 2 satellites on the top, which makes 34. The total payload of these 34 satellites plus the launch, the device to keep them, to release them at the good moment, is weighing approximately 5 tons and 500 kilos, 5.5 tons, and this will be launched in a pretty much polar orbit and 87.4 degrees. and a polar orbit would be at 90 degrees. This is much more towards the poles than the Starlinks, which will help cover the northern regions, but Starlink is they pretty much said this was not worth it because there are not many people up there. Of course, they will cover it, Starlink, but with less satellites than the regular central regions. But not with OneWeb, they are covering also the northern regions. The initial orbit, the parking orbit, will be at 450 kilometers circular, so apogee and perigee at 450 kilometers, and the release will not be like the Starlinks, which are pretty much yeeted out with a sling effect. The upper stage is rotating and slings the satellites away. They bump into each other. That's dirty. I believe many of the failing satellites, failing Starlink satellites, had failed because they bumped into each other in the past. But now with OneWeb, they will release the satellites 4 at the same time, 1 row at a time. So one row has 8 satellites. They will release 4 at the same time in a cross pattern, and then 4 others. And between each release, the upper stage, the frigate upper stage, will fire its thrusters to not to change the orbit. Of course, it will change the orbit a little, but to move away from the satellites, to primarily to avoid any collision, but also to help with the radio command of the satellites, because the Starlink satellites, they are so close to each other, then they have SpaceX has to wait a little for the satellites to move away from each other in order to take control of them. For a while, they are just lying there without any possibility to control them. And the OneWeb, they do not want that, and so the frigate upper stage is firing the thrusters to move away from the 4 satellites that were released before releasing 4 other ones. And once they are released, this is pretty much like the Starlink again. They have a Hall effect thrusters, and ion thrusters that will change the orbit from 450 kilometers to 1200 kilometers, and this will be the end orbit, the final orbit. So the problem when you release a lot of satellites in single launch, like the Starlinks or the OneWeb, is that they are all in the same plane. And of course, obviously, you don't want that, because 36 satellites or 60 Starlink satellites in the same plane, it's way too many. You want to spread them out a little to cover a bit more land ground. And but hopefully this is made quite automatically by the Earth. You should watch Scott Manley's video about what he calls the fat Earth theory. The thing is, the Earth is fatter on the equator. This is not a sphere; it's smaller. The equator is fatter, and therefore it attracts the satellites each time they move above the poles. They move a little. This is the precession. This helps move the satellites. Of course, once the satellites are released, they are all in the same plane, and they move. They suffer the same effect. Each of the satellites suffers the same effect, but by moving up and or down, they can manage to spread them out. Why? Because the effect that changes the precession of the ascending and descending node, the point at which the satellites cross the equator, it depends. The effect is much stronger near the Earth at lower orbits. And once the satellite has reached his final orbit, his final plane, the thrusters are fired and the satellite is moving towards its final orbit at 1200 kilometers, and then the effect is much weaker, and the satellite, it doesn't stop moving, it still moves, but much less. And much importantly, all the satellites of the constellation are moving at the same pace, minus the ones that are still in a lower orbit and move very fast, much faster than the others. So this is the payload. And the rocket, of course, we have the rocket is the Soyouz rocket. I'm pretty sure you already have heard of it, because this is a historic rocket of Gagarin's flight. Not really, not this one, not this version. It has been modernized, but it's the same shape and features some of its iconic processes and parts. And we have a central core with we have the lower part of the rocket it's composed of a central core and 4 side boosters. The side boosters are called by the Russians the first stage, and the central core is called the second stage, although they are all fired at the same time. And each of the boosters and the central core has 4 main engines. So that's 5 times 4 main engines, and which means 20 engines at the start. But that's not all. These engines cannot move. They do not gimbal like the Raptor or the Merlin engine. And the Russians, they like to have other smaller engines that do gimbal. They are called vernier thrusters. They were used a little bit in the Atlas rocket, the first Atlas rocket, and some upper stages in the US too. And each of the 4 boosters has two vernier thrusters that gimbal and help steer the rocket. So 2 times 4, that's 8 more. We have 28 gimbaling motors, and the central core also has 4 vernier thrusters, which means the first stage at start has 32 engines to light, and that's more than the first stage of the Super Heavy first stage for the Starship. So when you hear that the Super Heavy will have an insane number of motors, that's a bit true, but it's already made by the Russians, and they already fly the Soyouz with 32 motors, and they have flown the Soyouz with 32 motors for almost 2,000 flights without a problem, without huge problems. There have been some problems in the past, but recently only some problem with the separation. And when the booster have less fuel than the central core, also the motors are burning much more propellant. The propellant is RP1, which is kerosene, and liquid oxygen. And when the boosters are empty, or almost empty, because a rocket doesn't empty its tanks. It stops the engines before emptying the tanks. When the boosters have finished, of course the motors are not quite stopped. They are on idle, if you want, and the bottom straps are released. It's only attached by an upper joint, which because the boosters still push and it's only attached by an upper joint that can rotate, a sort of hinge. The boosters start to move away from the central core, and just 1 second or so after that, the upper joint is detached, and there is a stream of liquid of gas that moves the upper part of the booster away, and all the 4 boosters are spreading around the central core, like it's called a coronal cross. It's very interesting to see. If you play the Kerbal Space program, you may have used these boosters, but in KSP, of course, because it's the game mechanic don't allow something too realistic, they added a separation motor with a solid rocket motor on top. But in reality, it's the liquid oxygen tank that has helium to pressurize it, and oxygen vapors that pressurize the whole thing, and they just release a venting valve on top of it, and the venting valve is aimed at the central core, which makes the booster fly away from the central core. And if that's very neat, that's a really good idea. And in fact, this will be used by SpaceX with the Starship first stage, the Super Heavy. They want to rotate the Super Heavy only with the gas that is inside the tanks, the almost empty tanks. They are empty of liquid methane on liquid oxygen, but they are filled with liquid methane for the Starship, liquid methane, gas methane, and gaseous oxygen, and you can steer a ship with that, if you aim your vents in the right direction. So after the boosters, the second stage, the central core, is pushing a little bit to finish the job, and it's soon empty too, because it was lit at the same time as the others. And then the third stage is lit to almost switch orbit, almost, because in the latest versions, the Soyouz has a very high payload capacity, and the upper stage is used to finish the orbit. So the third stage is a little bit like the Saturn V second stage. The third stage is almost switching orbit. It's pushing. It only has one motor and one main motor on 4 vernier thrusters also. And what's interesting, it's they do what is called the hot fire. They ignite the motor instead of having thrusters to settle the propellants in the tanks, because otherwise it would be zero G, and the pumps would not be able to feed the motors. The next stage is ignited, while the previous stage, the central core, is still thrusting. It's still it's still powering the rocket, and the third stage is ignited just for a few seconds before releasing the attach, the straps, and letting the central core fall into onto the ground. And after the third stage, it's the most recent part of the rocket, the frigate upper stage. This upper stage was developed in the 1990s, but it was first flown around the year 2000, and it's used to send higher payloads into orbit because it's reliable, it's autonomous, it has GPS, not really GPS, but GLONASS. I think it also has GPS to precisely know where it is. The engine can be lit 7 times, which means it can deliver multiple payloads on multiple orbits. It's also used to send payloads towards planets. And I just saw your chat, Straight as a Paddock. Thank you. And you go to sleep. Thank you. And the frigate upper stage is really a modern upper stage, like you can have on the Falcon 9. It has multiple relights. It is autonomous, which means it doesn't have to have ground control permanently. It can have a pattern, something to. It is programmed on the ground, and then it does what it has to do to reach the destination orbit. And in that case, there will be no need to relight the engines. Only the thrusters, the RCS thrusters, will be used to move a little bit away from between each release of 4 satellites. So I think the stream should have begun. It has, but there's nothing to see. Only 25 minutes before liftoff, I will check Twitter to know if there is some news. And yeah, there are news, but it's in Russian. If someone knows what it says. Okay. 23 minutes ago. Go. Okay. Seems like everything is on track. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see. Don't hesitate if you have any question to ask it in the comments. I will try to answer it. So, what is interesting with the Soyouz, with any Soyouz launch, is the ignition process, because you have 32 motors to light before. You not only have to light them, you also have to check if they are all nominal, if they are all performing well before releasing the clamps. So a Soyouz launch is very interesting because the engines are lit and they wait a few seconds. It's quite long. It always seems quite long compared to other launches. All the engines are running, but the rocket isn't moving. And that's really, really nice. Really interesting to see. You always wonder if they will abort, but finally they release the clamps, and the rocket is moving up, of course. And the launch pad is really nice, also because the last clamps are working with gravity. They have huge concrete part to counterweight counterweight it, and while the rocket is sitting on the pad, the clamps are the arms are folded around the rocket and holding it very very strongly. But once the clamps are released and the rocket starts to lift off, it also releases the weight of the rocket is released from the arms on the bottom, and the concrete counterweight they allow the arms to fold away, and that's really interesting. And one other part that is interesting with the Soyuz is because the first stage, what we would call the first stage, but the central core with the 4 boosters, is really wide compared to other rockets. So the rocket is not very high and it's quite wide, and this configuration make it very quite less subject to crosswinds. The crosswinds are when in one part of the atmosphere the winds are going in one direction, and while the rocket is moving up, it's crossing another layer when the wind is moving in another direction. And a rocket that is really thin and long will be very subject to crosswinds and will be at risk of exploding. The Falcon 9 is very much subject to that because it's so thin and high. But on the other hand, the Soyuz is really sturdy, really fat, and can withstand a lot of crosswinds. So they can launch during a snowstorm. They have, of course, it's not recommended, but they can do that. They have a few launch sites available, in one in Russia from the Vostochny Cosmodrome that is used more and more because it's in Russia. But this one in Kazakhstan is the historic launch site, but Russia wants to get rid of it because they have to pay the Kazakh Republic a lot for it. So that's why they developed the Vostochny Cosmodrome, which is near Japan. It's completely on the other end of the country. And for the Russian rockets, they travel by train, not like the US rocket that travel by road. And they also have Soyouz that is launched by Arianespace from Kourou in French Guiana, and because of it's much closer to the equator, and because of that, the rocket is performing better in the near the equator when it launches in an equatorial plane. But this launch today is pretty much the opposite. They launch almost towards the poles, so there is no need for a launch from the equator. They have already launched, and they will launch again from Kourou for OneWeb. All the OneWeb satellites will be at a 87.4 orbit, inclination orbit. So Kourou doesn't provide any help for that, but it doesn't matter. They can launch anyway. The Kourou launch site is very interesting for the Russians because they wanted to be able to visit the Chinese space station, Tianwen, and they cannot because the Chinese decided to put their station on an inclination just below that of Baikonur or Vostochny. This is what's called a pro-gamer move. They don't want the Russians anywhere near their station, but the Russians have a backup plan, and since there are also already facilities to launch the Soyuz from Kourou, maybe they can work around it a little and add the ability to launch crew from Kourou and therefore reach the Chinese space station. This would be the best way for the Russians to launch Soyouz towards the Chinese space station. I'm not sure if the Soyouz, a regular Soyouz, would be able to dock with the Tianwen space station because they have the international docking adapter, which is the NASA docking adapter, which was itself evolved from the Russian, but the Russians, they do not use that. I believe they mounted an international docking adapter on a Soyuz once. They flew it once, it worked, but it's so big they have to lower the payload. So they usually don't do that. They stuck with their old narrow small docking adapter that is working very fine to dock with the station. The space station has three kinds. If I'm not saying something wrong, has three kinds of docking ports. The international docking adapter, where you have the Dragon spacecraft, and probably soon or not, maybe. Space TV, thank you for your message. Playback on other website has been disabled by the video owner. Oh, I'm not streaming the launch yet. I have a look at OneWeb stream, but they are not streaming anything yet. We'll see when they start streaming. I hope I will be able to continue streaming. Thank you for the update. So they have the docking adapter for the Dragon, the large docking adapter for each element of the station. Every US module has them, and also the Cygnus cargo and the Russian docking adapters that are used on the Russian side of the station. And I don't know how we can watch the flight. There's only 14 minutes left. I'll try to find some stream somewhere. That would be a very bad news if they don't allow the stream. Maybe the Ariane stream. Soyuz ST-34. They're not streaming anything. They will start their stream in 10 minutes. We'll see. Sorry, I had a mishap. So on Twitter maybe we will have some news. I'm watching the OneWeb launch line hashtag, and there's only Russian on that. Sorry, my shortkeys are messed up. So the flight, it will last 3 hours and 45 minutes. Why is it? Why is it so long? To reach orbit is really fast, only 10 minutes or so, something like that. But they will wait for 1 hour for the first payload release. Why? Just to to wait for the payload to be above a ground station. The frigate doesn't need, the frigate upper stage doesn't need a ground station, but the satellites will need one, and the sooner they will take control of the satellite, the better it will be to avoid any further problem, because the satellite will be oriented towards the ground. They will start check if everything is okay, and they will start once the link is up between the satellite and the ground. It's much easier to troubleshoot if there is something wrong with one element. And if you release the satellite above, the launch will be almost due north, and the orbit will be reached approximately just before the Arctic. And of course there are no one to listen to the satellites up there, so they will wait one full revolution around the globe to be over Russia again. And of course the Earth will have rotated in between, and there will be a little west, maybe over the Eastern Europe part, and the ground station will be able to catch the signal of the satellites, and then the release will be every 15 minutes or so. To, like I said, between each release, the RCS will be fired to move away from the previous 4 satellites that will have been released, and that is to ensure a good radio separation. So only 10 minutes to go, and we still do not have any stream to share. I had seen a stream that was the stream from OneWeb noticed Ariane has started. Maybe I'll share it here. So, excuse me, that's only my 4th live stream, and I'm a bit clumsy. So we have the stream starting. Let me arrange the windows. Just a moment. So this is the facility where they integrate all the satellites within the pairing, and the cylindrical thingy where everything is attached is very important, because excuse me, the music is very loud in my ears now. I just want to shut it. Okay. So
and they are moving through orbit, preparing to provide
maybe it's better.
high-speed internet from space. Each launch expands OneWeb's capability to deliver that connectivity lifeline to those parts of the world where it's needed.
So I'm shutting the audio down, because she's just saying almost the same thing that I've been saying up to now. And we have a look at on the right at the rocket. So the fairing is quite long from the usual Soyouz fairing. That's because there are a lot of satellites. 36, it's not trivial to stack 36 satellites in the same fairing. And of course, SpaceX does better with the 60 Starlink satellites or an almost 100 satellites for the rideshare program, but these are quite big. They're not on. This is for the rideshare program. The satellites are only a few centimeters, 10 or 20 centimeters long. Here it's 1 meter. That's 3 feet. They're not that small. They have huge solar panels, and the total payload mass is 5.5 tons. That's a huge payload to deliver. Not that huge in absolute, but huge because there are a lot of maneuvers to do between each release. That's what is important here. They have to move away from each satellite. So what is she saying now? Maybe I'll try. I think I can still improve a little with my live streams. So she is at the demonstration site. These are the antennas for the ground station, because they need ground stations just as Starlink. And in fact, there was a small controversy because to deliver internet in Russia, they needed ground stations in Russia, and the Russian government didn't want to allow free internet. They want a big firewall, just like in China. So what they did, they made a joint venture. They made a joint venture between OneWeb and the Russian government, and the Russian government is controlling 51% of the joint venture, and therefore controlling the ground stations. And if they want, they can shut it down, or more likely they will filter what is coming through. If you ask me, that's not a very nice evolution of the internet, but I don't know what I can do about that, sadly. So only 5 minutes before flight, it's completely dark over there. Full disclosure, it's also dark where I live in France. It's the same, and probably the same in UK, where they are from where they are broadcasting now. So we have Stefan Israel, the CEO of Arianespace.
Our Soyouz launch vehicle is going to deliver 34 more OneWeb satellites into orbit. The
Same
mission
access
duration
as
will
me.
be 3 hours and 45 minutes. This launch will be delivered from the Baikonur spaceport. For this mission, I would like to thank all our partners federated by Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, and for sure, our customer OneWeb. So now, enjoy the show.
Now, earlier this week, the Soyuz ST-34 rocket was rolled into its launch position. Let's have a look at the rocket's journey to the launch pad.
That's really interesting to see the Soyuz running out, because it's on rails. We don't see that on the US
at the top of the launcher,
rockets.
and the complete stack of 34 OneWeb satellites on this upper stage are protected by the fairings of their journey to space. Now, this is all done in a dedicated clean room to make sure no dirt or debris can pollute the satellite's infrastructure. This upper stage forms the top of the rocket.
Each satellite has parabolic antennas, a lot of parabolic antennas. I don't know how many.
We'll see these 3 stages separate during the launch. The 4 boosters arranged around the bottom of the rocket are dedicated to powering the rocket through the lower atmosphere, and then they are discarded as the engine in the second stage takes over.
So that
Now, 3 days before the launch, the
voyage on
complete launch
train.
vehicle is transferred to the launch pad. At Baikonur, the rocket is brought to the launch pad by a special 500-metre railway. And it's transported horizontally and then raised into its vertical takeoff position.
The rocket's not really raised, it's lowered into the launch pad because the launch pad is a bit lower than the ground.
Once this is complete, various connecting supply cables are attached. And then 2 days before launch, a full dress rehearsal.
Around the fairing you have a heating cover or insulating cover, maybe. It's summer around there, to protect the satellites. And it probably has AC inside with a lot of filters to ensure clean air.
Here we are, with less than 1.5 minutes to lift off. The launch sequence itself is automatic, triggered by an ignition key. It begins around 5 minutes before liftoff. At 2 minutes and 25 seconds before liftoff, so about a minute ago, the umbilical connectors were separated. In the meantime, there is the pressurization of the Soyouz 3-stage tanks. And at minus 45 seconds, the transfer will be done to the 3-stage onboard power. During the ignition sequence, we will have a progressive increasing of the thrust level, which will enable the launch team to check that the engines work normally. First, there'll be the ignition at 16 seconds before liftoff, followed by a preliminary thrust level of 20% of full power, which will be at 11 seconds before liftoff, and then an immediate thrust level of 85% of full power 4 seconds before liftoff. And finally, full thrust level of 100% at liftoff. So we're literally moments away. I can already see that the smoke is starting to billow around. So that means that the ignition sequence has already
right
begun.
side is
You can see it there sitting
maybe
on the
off by
launch
a
pad
few
where
seconds.
it has been for the past 3 days, and of course it now is fully autonomous. So very shortly we'll see the infrastructure fall away, and we'll start, and there it is, the infrastructure has now come away. So they're going to be working through those different thrust levels. You can see the smoke billowing around it. It looks incredibly atmospherical.
Yeah.
Remember, it's currently 3 a.m.
Apparently I'm
over
off by
where
a
they're
few
launching it.
seconds.
So they've been working throughout the night to get to this point. So they're going to be working up through those different thrust levels, starting to ignite the engines, and very shortly we'll see those engines fire up. And you can hear them on the background speaking through the countdown as it starts to prepare more and more. We've got lovely clear conditions this evening, or this morning for where they are, wherever you're watching in the world. And we'll be there very, very shortly. This is really the moment that I get the most excited about, because it's incredibly exciting as you see it sitting there, getting ready for the big final moment. And remember, they've done a full dress rehearsal of this 2 days ago. So they'd have gone through all the checks and systems, making sure that everything is
That's a
in
full
place.
trench below the rocket, not a flame diverter like in the US. They have
so this
dug
is
a
launch
full
number 9.
trench where the ignition motors can blast whatever they want, and everything.
And we'll have
no need to
any moment now. I haven't got
pour
anything to
water.
report.
No deluge system. It's just very far away from the ground, which ensures the protection of the rocket and the infrastructure, the launch pad. It's very much a launch pad, not a launch tower like we are used to seeing.
Still waiting. We can still see that there's definitely smoke.
It's not very important if they didn't
around.
launch at the exact time
Okay,
they
I have
said.
actually just got information that we have report of a sequence interruption. So currently it is not going to take off right this second in time. We don't know if this means that it actually won't be taking off at all tonight, but what we do know is that those automatic checks that it's going through, something has been raised, something has stopped it from doing its normal sequence. So we'll just have to sit tight. I've got an ear to Ariane Spas. I can hear what's going on and getting reports as and when they come in. I mean, this is the part of doing a live launch, isn't it? We don't quite know what will happen. And this is also what makes it incredibly exciting.
Okay, I've checked on Twitter.
So we're waiting on an
I'm not seeing
update on our
anything.
launch
If you know anything, don't
So that's what
hesitate to
I've
tell
been
me
given. That's the
in the
information that
chat.
I've been given, that there has been an interruption with the launch sequence. So for now, we just sit tight.
I cut the audio
And I'm sure there's
because she's just filling the gaps like I'm doing, but you don't need to have this in double. So obviously the rocket is filled up to the top, ready to lift off, but probably some problem with pressure in one tank or the other. Of course, I don't know anything at this point. So we don't have any timer but on display, but the countdown is halted at that point. It would have been a good idea for OneWeb to include a countdown of some sort, but of course they did not. So some people on Twitter are saying scrub, but they are probably not. They do not have much information as we do. Okay, it's scrubbed for tonight. She's just saying that it's scrubbed for tonight. So it happens. They will try again in a few days, probably. Depends of if the problem is really important, or most likely just a small glitch in some parts. They will have to drain all the fuel, drain all the hydraulic fluid, and probably drain the helium, and we'll start working on the part that is faulty on the rocket. So it happens, and it's not a big deal because it's not an interplanetary probe. It doesn't matter if they launch now or in 1 hour or in 1 week, 1 month. It's important because of the schedule behind the other launches. But these satellites can be launched at any moment in time. Of course, they not exactly at any moment. They have to wait a little, but they have a lot of leeway. It's not like a space station, international space station resupply mission or crew mission where they have to launch at the exact second the station is passing, not right over the launch pad, but in the US quite at the opposite, around the Earth. And it's not like the interplanetary probes when they have to launch at a specific during a specific window. They only have a few seconds per day. No, for that flight they can launch probably a few hours per day, each day, and we'll wait to know. I'm checking Twitter right now to know if there is further information about it. I'm not seeing anything interesting apart from the scrub for tonight. So if you have any question, don't hesitate. So Space TV, yes, there is no countdown. Maybe the launch was scrubbed a long time ago and Roscosmos didn't fully tell the OneWeb live stream. Sorry, it's not Roscosmos is not launching the rocket. It's Arianespace. Arianespace is operating the rocket, although Soyouz is obviously a Russian rocket. It's an Arianespace launch, and maybe some people on the launch pad didn't. They knew from a long time ago. No, that's not. I just. And it's not possible because they moved the equivalent of the strong back, the arm, the main arm was moved a few seconds before the intended launch time, and they wouldn't have done that if they didn't intend to launch. So yes, that's a bit strange to have a launch without a countdown. So, but I guess we would have seen it start, ignite. Like I said, the Soyuz rocket is standing for quite a long time on the launch pad before the engine has pulled up and the rocket is released. And that is quite a feature of the Soyuz, just like the Korolev cross. And maybe better luck next time. I don't know. I'll check Twitter one last time. If there was nothing to see, I will end the live stream unless you have some kind of question. Just wanted to inform you that I will release a video probably tomorrow or Saturday about the Starliner scrub. Detailed video about the technical reasons about the Starliner scrub. There was a press conference with a Boeing official. I can't remember his name. He explained exactly what happened, and in fact that's really interesting. I can tell you, it's no secret. The Starliner service module is filled with nitrogen tetroxide and hydrazine. These fuels the RCS thrusters and the onboard motors, just like the Dragon and quite a lot of capsules. The Soyuz has exactly the same system, if I remember correctly. The Apollo had the same system, the space shuttle also. So that's well known for quite a long time, and to keep the nitrogen tetroxide inside the tanks and release it just when you want it, which means when you want to ignite the thrusters, you have some valves, and those valves need some kind of seals to prevent any leak. And the only thing that works and was invented for that is the Teflon. There are Teflon seals on the valves that prevents any leaks, and that's why we have Teflon pans to cook, because in the 60s they wanted to use nitrogen tetroxide, and they had to come up with some material that could withstand the acid, the nitric acid. So the problem is the Teflon is very much tight. It works as a seal, but it lets some of the nitrogen tetroxide seep through the seal. Not very much, but a little bit. And normally it would not be a problem, but there is something that was not expected on the other part of the other side of the seal, the outer part. There was some atmospheric humidity, and this humidity reacted with the nitrogen tetroxide to form nitric acid. and this nitric acid attacked the metal, and while it attacked the metal, it oxidized the metal, and then, just like rust, it prevented the valves from opening when they wanted to test it. And that's why they removed the Starliner from the launch pad, and they tried everything they could. They said with a mechanical action, thermal action, and electromagnetic action, and basically they try to push it, they try to heat it, to give it some leeway, they try to move the oxidized valves, and for some of them, for 9 of them, it worked. And once it worked well. It was sufficiently it was efficient, and it worked, and they were confident they could fly, but 4 of the valves wouldn't move whatever they were doing. So they decided to scrap the launch. They are removing the Starliner from the launch pad right now, and they will separate the capsule from the service module and send it back to the factory. When they will assess what it is that needs to be disassembled to access the valves, because they don't want to disassemble the whole ship, and then they will know how much work they have to do, and we will have scheduled once they will get the Starliner back at the factory. So I think that's it. I will end the stream now. Good night, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Bye. See you probably Saturday for a regular video.